says April 7th he married Leah Swanson, and I don't have the year, but I'm sure they were married before my parents were, and that was in 1922, so it was probably a year or two before that, but I don't have the date, because their oldest son was about a year and a half older than my brother. And they had 3 children, Douglas, Artis, and Mary. Douglas passed away on April 29th of 1970, and I have a little clipping. I think maybe I'll just pull out a couple things from that if I can find it here. Naturally, I can't. But anyway, I have one of them now. All right, this is it. This is Douglas Swanson was born to Leah and Frank Swanson and died at the age of 47. He spent most of his entire life in the Western Springs area, except for time he spent in service in the Second World War. And on 22nd of January 1945, he was united in marriage with Esther Fagerhog. And they have one daughter, Lana, who now lives in, I believe it's in the Phoenix, Arizona area. And she was married to a boy that was raised here, a Monty Fosnot. And I think they have at least 3 children. Esther, his wife, still lives in Wessington Springs. And Artis Swanson, maybe I'll go back just a little bit. Shortly after Frank died, they were farming here. They moved to Jamesville, Wisconsin. Her and the 2 girls. Doug didn't go with them. And Leah and Artis and Mary, I think they worked some of them worked in the Parker Pen Company. And Artis came back here sometime right after the war and met and married Harold Rohde. Maybe she knew him before, I'm not going to say that. She probably did, but she married a Harold Rohde over by Lane. They live south of Lane and still live on the farm that his dad lived on. They have 3 children, 3 boys, Steve and Mark. They both live in the Wessington Springs area. And their youngest son, David, lives in Arizona, I believe it is. And he's married and he's got 2 children. They're expecting a second one. Now we move on to the twins. Minnie and Mabel Swanson. They were born in this house right during, I guess, when they were doing some thrashing. I see it was October 10th, 1897, and at that time they thrashed late in the year. They thrashed out of the stacks. The story I had that they were thrashing when they had thrash. They were born when they had thrashers here one fall. Minnie is the only one that is still alive, and she must be going to be 92 years old in October. She married Dewey Forsberg in 1923 in Moline, Illinois. They have no children. She is now in a Friendship Manor home in Rock Island, Illinois. Mabel Swanson Renner, I guess that's the name she used. She She used Mabel Swanson quite a bit in her as a middle name. But anyway, she married Paul Renner in June 28th of 1923. So the girls got married the same summer. They had one daughter, Jean. She was born on December 17th, 1929, and passed away September 11th, 1974, at the age of 44. There was kind of a sad they had kind of a sad time with Jean, because she married a real fine fellow, Vern Ogle, in June 18th, 1950, June 18th, 1950, and had two daughters, Cindy and Marcia. And one Sunday, as Jean was taking these small children to Bible Sunday school, or whether she was bringing them home, I don't know, but she had a car accident and had some brain damage. Her brain was damaged, and her daughters weren't seriously hurt, but she had brain damage, and she spent almost 20 years as unconscious in a hospital and home, almost like a vegetable, and finally dying at the age of 44, after spending almost 19 years this way. I believe she died probably of pneumonia. It was a tremendous hardship for her husband and children, and her mother and father, and a financial hardship too, keeping her all these years in the home. Her two daughters and her husband still live in Moline, Illinois, Rock Island area, and we hear from them once in a while. Then the youngest boy in the family, Edwin, or we call him Pete, or Ed, and I thought he was the baby of the family, but according to this, he was not. He was born April 18th, 1894, and passed away in 1961 at the age of 67. And he was the only one of the boys that lived to see his 60th birthday. He was born in Giroux County and passed away in California. He married Dorothy Rundle, and they had one daughter named Fairby. They moved to California in probably towards the end of the Depression. I can remember when they left. They had a Model T Ford or Model A Ford. I can remember the day they left. But they left and went out there where there was more jobs and lived the rest of their life out there. Their daughter, Dorothy, is still alive to my knowledge, and was in the last few months living in a home. And their daughter, Fairby, lives in Colorado. Okay. The youngest of the children was Ellen Swanson. She was born July 21st, 1895, in this house. We're in South Dakota, and I'm sure it would be in this house. Passed away in 1975 at the age of 80. She married Carl Lundstedt in 1921 in Rock Island, Illinois. And they had two children, Bob and Lois. Bob lives in Arlington Heights, Illinois. Lois in La Crosse, New Mexico. She has one daughter, and Bob has 4 sons. We have not kept in touch with these cousins, because we I hardly knew them. They were a little older than I am. I've met them each once or twice. But, I think maybe my sister Helen keeps in touch with them, but I don't. Now I think I'll probably go back to my dad, because this is probably the one I'm most familiar with, and give you a little more history there. Maybe I'll just back up just a little bit on Andrew Swanson. He came out here in 1888, and seemed like he lived here for 2 or 3 years, 4 years, and he moved back to Illinois, and back here, and then back again. And I don't know why, but it seemed like he was shuffling back and forth between here and Iowa, Charles City, Fairfax, Iowa. So there was some of the children were born here, some of them were born back there. But anyway, I think eventually he moved back there for good in probably about 1910. And the older boys stayed here, and the younger girls, the 3 young girls, and Ernest, the oldest son, must have moved back to Iowa with him, or were back there. Anyway, a few years that he was here, he accumulated 5 quarters of land, and sold them or to his 4 boys, 5 boys, and this is all part of the farm that I farm right now. This quarter that we're on right now was Wendell's quarter, and then his Wendell's son Dale owned it, and when Dale Swanson, who passed away in 1980, and his wife Eileen passed away in 1983 or 4, died. Dale had 4 quarters of land. Their one son Carl owns this quarter, and he has 2 quarters to the north that his other 2 sons own, Carl and Paul, and he has another quarter that's up closer, about 4 miles north, that his daughter Linda owns. I guess I didn't mention about Dale's children. I should, because I'm real familiar with them. I'm real familiar with, maybe I'll go back and talk a little bit about Dale. Dale, I think after about 1940, Dale decided to come out here and run this farm, and eventually buy it. And he just gotten married to Eileen Moling, and I was a first grader in school, rural school here in fall of 1940, and Dale was my first grade teacher, and he was also started farming here at the same time. And he taught just the 1 year, and then he decided to farm full time. But anyway, in the fall of 1944, he was picking corn about a mile north of here, and had a bad accident and got his foot wrapped in a power takeoff on the tractor, and broke his leg in 2 places. He was able, the lucky part of it, it killed the engine on the tractor and stopped, and was able to reach a butcher knife that he had in the toolbox and cut himself free. He had an old Model T car on the end of the field, and somehow he got to that had to push it. His leg was dangling. He had to push that car to get it started, and drove a mile home. And the neighbors, I'm not quite sure who did it, but they got him bundled up and rushed him to the Mitchell Hospital, which I guess was a pretty fast trip. And they saved his leg, but he was in a cast and laid up for 2 years with that. Most of the time he laid right in this house here, back in the back bedroom, because I can remember coming over many times and visiting him. But anyway, a week after he had this accident, his first daughter was born, Linda, in the same hospital. So his wife she's had many trying experiences over the years. Dale, after his leg healed, and went back to farming. The neighbors and his brother Donnie and my brother and I, we helped over here quite a bit some of those years, trying to help him run the farm. His leg always bothered him, and it bothered him worse in the summertime. And he spent many times in the hospital and getting his leg. He wore a special shoe. I don't know how many different shoes he got fitted for. Finally, probably in the early 50s, maybe 53 or 4, he decided to have his leg amputated. He was getting osteomyelitis in it, and it just never seemed to heal. He had it amputated and was fitted with an artificial limb. And I think then he could get along better. But anyway, in 1956, they decided he got a job in Plankington as a county assessor. They said this was something new. We'd been a township assessor up here in our township, and they went from township assessors to county assessors, and he got the job in Aurora County as a county assessor. And they moved down there and put their land in the cell bank for several years, maybe. I think they got some of it in for 10 years, rented the rest of it out, and they lived the rest of their life in Plankington. He was just about ready to retire, or just retired, when he had a little heart trouble, and he died from a heart attack. Now I'll go down and do just a little bit on my dad. He was born, as I said, in this house on August 28, 1889. He was as a young man, I think I suppose he helped on the farm. Also, he was a carpenter. He did carpenter work. I don't think he did carpenter work on his own, but he did work with several carpenters, good carpenters in the community. And one was Sam Monley, who was a real good carpenter. He worked for him and some of the carpenters in town. And in 1922, and it has a little clipping. I'll just read it to you. This is Albert Swanson and Miss Louise Helland were married in Madison, South Dakota on Monday, December 4, 1922. They return to Dural County Tuesday and will make their home in Pleasant Township with Mr. and Mrs. Frank Swanson until the new house on the farm which Mr. Swanson has been preparing for his bride is completed. The bride's home is in Fedora. She has been a successful teacher in this county for the past 2 years and was teaching here and it was while she was teaching here that the bride and groom became acquainted. Mr. and Mrs. Andrew Swanson, former residents of Dural County, now Rock Island, Illinois. He was born in Dural County and spent his entire life in this county as a successful farmer. Mr. and Mrs. Swanson received the congratulations of their friends in which the Republican, that's the name of the paper, joined. Just a clipping I happened to, somebody had given me that they had. My dad's quarter was the one that's it's a full mile south of here. It was homesteaded by a fellow named Stanger. Some point in time, my grandpa acquired that quarter of land, also the quarter of land between where my dad lived and this quarter, which Frank Swanson owned. My dad built the house, the barn, the granary, and most of the buildings on the farm where I now live. And farmed through some pretty tough years in the 30s. And only to January 5th, 1941, he passed away from pneumonia, leaving my mother with 5 fairly young children. My oldest brother was 17, Gene, just out of high school and had started college in Huron. My sister Helen, who was probably 15 and a sophomore in high school. My brother Jim was 8 years old. My sister Myrna 4, and I was 6. Well, she had a load. But my brother Gene came home and he finished one semester, one half the year up there, and came home and run the farm for my mother. We still farmed with horses, which was a lot of work. We didn't farm that much. We probably farmed 2 quarters. Maybe sometimes we rented a little bit more. Milk cows. But I guess we struggled through the war years, and the years right after was just barely. Anyway, my brother Jim, at the age of about 13, developed a hip disease, and they call it Perthes disease. It's a softening of the hip. And before they figured out what was the matter with him, his hip broke, and the only cure for it was a cast and time. He spent 2 years. He wasn't sick from it, but he had a cast from his waist to the tip of his toes on his one leg, and he had to lay for 2 years. He was kind of heavy, but he spent most of the time at home, except when every 3-4 months we'd load him up in the car, and we opened up the trunk, took the back seat, the back out of the back seat, and slid him in through the trunk and took him to Mitchell. Otherwise we'd had to call an ambulance. But he'd go down and have his cast changed, and I think more for psychological reasons, every time they changed the cast, they would shorten it just a little bit. So you could see that there was some improvement. He took it real well, and my mother took care of him in our home. But to add more problems, my brother Gene, in the spring of 1946, which is, I think, just a few months after Jim got sick, and maybe at the same time, because I know several times we had both of them in the hospital at the same time, but he developed pleurisy and was very sick. He had, as a 10-year-old, he had developed rheumatic fever and it weakened his heart at that time, but he developed pleurisy from, I suppose, from chores and the work he was doing, and spent many months in the Mitchell Hospital. I guess at times we didn't think he was going to make it, but he did. And eventually he was able to come home too. So my mother had two of them sick at the same time, caring for them and trying to run the farm. And things got better. Gene got better, and probably sometime in 1949, Jim was out of his cast, able to get around on crutches, and he missed 1 year of high school. But then he could see that he didn't want to miss two, so he started the correspondence course and did part of his first year in high school at home, and second semester he started high school. And Gene eventually got well enough that he was able to go back to work. He got a job as a bookkeeper at the Farmers Union Elevator, and I think he was there almost 2 years when suddenly he had a heart attack, and on October 16th, 1949, which will be in just 3 or 4 months, will be 40 years ago, and passed away at the age of about 26. Sister Helen taught, after her graduation from high school, she taught rural school here in, I think, the Barber School 1 year, which is about 3 or 4 miles south of us. The next year she went up to Vienna, South Dakota, and taught 1 year in the school system in Vienna, and there she met her husband, Leo Klutz, and they were married in 1946. And they have 2 children. Brian, he is now living in a suburb of Minneapolis. I think it's Prairie Eden, Minneapolis, near Minneapolis. And he is an architect, and he has a wife and three girls. They're teenagers, I guess, I know. And daughter Laura lives in Sioux Falls, where my sister lives, and she works. Her husband works in Kmart. She married a fellow named Cummings, and Laura works for the telephone company, and they have 2 children that are just starting school. Jim